Thank you all for coming. This is the first in our series about modern relationships, and it's great to have you all here. My name is Logan Ury. I help lead a team at Google called the Irrational Lab, or a behavioral economics team. And we're very lucky to have Sherry Turkle here today in a conversation about conversations. Sherry is a MIT professor who has spent the last 30 years studying the psychology of people's relationships with technology. She's also the founder and director of the MIT Initiative on Technology and Self. She's a licensed psychologist and has written 4 books on our relationship with digital culture. These include The Second Self, Life on the Screen, Alone Together, and now Reclaiming Conversation. Thank you for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here, really delighted.
So today we'll be covering your new book, Reclaiming Conversation, how we can improve romantic relationships, how this relates to Google, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Wait. Yeah. How we can improve romantic relationships and how that relates to Google.
There's a comma in between.
There's a comma.
But it could also be connected.
I felt like I'd really prepared for this, and then all of a sudden I felt unprepared. Right?
Yeah.
I'd really gotten myself together, and then all of a sudden I felt unprepared.
And for those of you who want to take out that comma, we're going to open it up to questions at the end.
You have some expertise I don't have, right?
Yeah. So just to start off with the book, you talk about how reclaiming conversation begins with reclaiming our capacity for solitude.
Yes.
Can you talk about what we lose when we're alone because of our devices and what the value of solitude is and how it's different from loneliness?
Right. Well, I think that this probably, you know, the professor in me wants to say that this probably is the most important piece of my argument. And here's why. In criticisms of my work, I mean, even as recently as a Pew study that came out just a few months ago, people say things like, okay, well, look, let's give Sherry Turkle this. If you're together with your friends and you take out a phone, not good. You know, let's give her that kind of interrupts the conversation and cuts certain kinds of conversation short. But if you're alone and you take out your phone, why does that bother her? Like, what's it to her if when you're alone, you're on the constant feed and you can't, what is she, the Darth Vader of the internet? I mean, what's with that? And actually, I do make the argument that solitude and the capacity for conversation and relationship go together. And they go together like this, that solitude is the capacity to be alone with yourself, to know who you are, so that when you come to another person, you can hear what they have to say and you can listen to them and hear what they have to say and who they are, and not need to project who you need them to be onto them. And we all know that when we meet somebody who doesn't know who they are and who can't stand to be alone and comes to us for a, quote, conversation, they're not having a conversation at all. They're kind of glomming onto us to get us to almost support their fragile selves. So if you, when you're alone, are constantly going to your phone instead of being able to tolerate that moment of gathering yourself, that's a kind of wake-up call for you to make sure that you're comfortable with who you are and have cultivated this capacity for solitude. And recent research is not happy research. I mean, part of why I wrote this book is that recent research on solitude and conversation is chilling. There's this study that shows that if you just ask college students to sit in a chair without, and this is not my research, but I'm reporting research, well, if you ask them to sit in a chair without a phone, without a book, and say, we're going to ask you to do this for 6 to 15 minutes, are you good with that? They say, sure. Then you say, well, we're going to ask you to do this for 6 to 15 minutes. Do you think that you'd want to give yourself an electroshock during that time? They say, I don't think so. And they look like as though the researcher is crazy. And then after 6 minutes, they begin to self-administer electroshocks rather than just sit quietly with their own thoughts. And this actually is borne out in my research, where, you know, I do research like at stop signs, where that's like a 3-second, 4-second stop. People pull out a phone at a stop sign. They will not sit at a stop sign without pulling out a phone to check what's happening. So, you know, I mean, perhaps enough said, but there is a question, and then of course in Reclaiming Conversation I go on and on about how people talk about their incapacity, their anxiety about being alone with their thoughts, and how they want to fill that space up with what's on their phone and what that anxiety is about and so forth. So I actually think that reclaiming conversation, reclaiming relationship, does begin with reclaiming ourselves in solitude, and that this kind of false dichotomy between, oh, you know, give it to Sherry that, you know, when we're together, okay, we should lighten up with the phone, but when we're alone, you know, it's none of her business. I think I'd like to, you know, break that down.
Great. On a related note, the book emphasizes the importance of boredom, especially for children.
Yes. Can
you talk a bit about what comes out of boredom and why it's so important?
Well, neurophysiologically, boredom, a lot's going on in boredom that is not boring for your brain at all. Boredom is the time when your brain is actually establishing what's called the default mode network, which is the brain's sense of its stable autobiographical self. So in those moments of downtime, your brain is very busy indeed. And again, if your idea of a moment of boredom is an opportunity to fill in with the feed on your phone, you're depriving your brain of something it really needs. Beyond that, boredom is considered by most psychologists to be one of the signal achievements of childhood. The capacity to be bored and let your mind wander is your imagination calling to you to go inward rather than to turn outward to a phone or some other device, which is why somebody like me is so concerned with baby bouncers that have slots for an iPad, with potty trainers that have slots for an iPad. You know, these things were either moments where a caretaker and a child should have been allowed to engage in the beginnings of eye contact, communication, conversation, or they're moments for reverie. And to think these are minutes for for sort of screen stimulation, again, is robbing us of an important moment.
Another key theme in the book is empathy, and you mentioned that a meta-study found that a 40% decrease in empathy in college students over the past 20 years. You also mentioned that kids who spend 5 days at a device-free camp displayed much more empathy than a control group. What can you tell us about the relationship between technology and empathy?
Well, I would say that this is the sort of leitmotif of the book is this kind of empathy crisis, because I was brought into studying the book when I was asked to consult by middle schools about what teachers felt were disturbing patterns in middle school students, which I wouldn't have known from my own life as an MIT professor. What I knew from my life as an MIT professor is that students didn't want to come to office hours. Students want to send in an email and compose a perfect question and have me write them back a perfect answer, a kind of transactional model of what goes on with a professor. And I didn't have reason to think it was because they lacked empathy. What I knew is that they didn't know the work that conversation can do in terms of sparking learning. Because nobody who loves learning or who grew up to be a professor, was it because they wrote a professor a perfect letter and got a perfect letter back. It was because, on the contrary, they didn't have a perfect letter. They came in with nothing or little, and somebody said, well, that's not very good, but I'm going to stick with you because I care about you, come back and we'll work on this. It wasn't because they wrote a perfect and got a perfect return. So I noticed a kind of lack of, a kind of transactional idea about what a conversation was. But then I was asked to do this consulting work in middle schools where teachers were observing a lack of empathy among younger kids. And, you know, we're used to thinking of cyberbullying as, well, people don't see the face. And so, okay, they cyberbully because the face isn't called up, which is what calls up the sort of moral response in us. Philosophers have been telling us that for years, that it's the face that calls up our moral selves. But now psychology is teaching us that it's actually the face that is the lack of a face, the lack of an identity is what causes this online, I call it a sort of disinhibition that leads to cyberbullying. But now you're seeing that among kids in face-to-face behavior, where a child will, where the way one teacher said it, put it, that 8-year-olds play on the, 12-year-olds play on the playground like 8-year-olds, that they'll exclude a child, and then they can't imagine, they can't put themselves in the place of that child. They're not able to do what empathy requires, which is to put themselves in the place of. And the teachers began to talk about that in one school, and in their mind, it had to do with the way these kids weren't talking to each other, but were really almost all the time talking to each other through their phones. So in the lunchroom, their way of talking to each other was to take out their phones and show each other what was on their phones. And in fact, when I went to camps, these device-free camps where the empathy level goes way back up, I think because kids talk to each other and get this practice in putting yourself in the other person's place. I don't think this is complicated. They said, the kids said, that what was different between their relationships at camp and at home was that they spoke to each other not about what's on their phones, but what was just happening at camp. So there were signs from a lot of different places and spaces that there was something that, you know, there was something up with empathy. And you know, since the early days of working on my book, this book, empathy has become, you know, this empathy gap has certainly become a major theme, both in my work and then all, you know, throughout the research literature in psychology. I will say that I recently just spent a day with the woman who did the study showing the 40% decline in the past 20 years among college students, this big empathy drop. And she is developing empathy apps for the iPhone. And I think that's where I'd love in a Q&A to hear your thoughts. I mean, because here we are at a place where it's not out of line to think of you developing empathy apps. And clearly, I think of us as the empathy app. We are the empathy app, since the way that we develop empathy is to talk to each other. And I think the idea, but I'm not closed at all to the idea of using technology to help us in reclaiming empathy. But my first instinct is we are the empathy app. We need to talk to each other. We need to talk to our kids. That putting a screen, that somehow putting a baby in a baby bouncer and putting a screen that has an empathy app in front of this baby instead of putting you, you know, I'm like, and yet I felt for her that she was so upset when she got this response, you know, she got this result, she wanted to do something. And I think that that's part of one of the themes of the book is that it, you know, it's not anti-technology, it's pro-conversation, that sometimes we just need to, you know when to be there for each other. So anyway, that's my empathy story. Clearly oh, and also, what's the difference between empathy and compassion? Because it's been a lot of, since the book came out, I mean, really, I wrote it to spark a conversation about conversation. There's been a lot of talk about, well, empathy isn't as important as compassion. I mean, look at all the stuff we learn about places all over the world because we have the internet. Maybe we have, now maybe the important thing we have is compassion for all these things we now know about. And maybe empathy is a little old school. So I'm here to say I don't think empathy is old school.
So now I want to transition a bit into talking about
romance.
Modern romance. So in the book you mentioned that the sight of a phone on a table, even if it's silent, even if it turns over, worsens the quality of the conversation and makes it less empathetic. So I'm definitely going to take that advice. I was wondering what other advice you have for people here who feel like technology is getting in the way of their romantic connections.
Well, this study is amazing. I mean, if you just did one thing, but not just in romance, in your families, in your friendships, with your children, with your everybody. I mean, so just make sure you understand the setup of this experiment. You take two people out to lunch. You don't tell them obviously you don't tell them what the experiment's about. You feed them their lunch. On the table, there's a phone turned off and turned over, and you're measuring their conversation against a control group with no phone. Just the silent phone on the table will cause the conversation to go to truly trivial matters, and the people will report less of a sense of connection with each other, less of a sense of caring about each other or of understanding what's on the other person's mind, just the presence of that phone. So they redid the study. I mean, it was such an amazing study. They redid the study with in a natural setting, forget the laboratory and giving people lunch in a laboratory, in a natural setting like a shopping mall, and they just put the phones like on the periphery of people's vision. I mean, like at the edge of people's vision. And again, they found that even a silent phone disconnects us. So the most important thing you can do on a date, or on a breakfast, or at a lunch, or at a business meeting, or at an anything, where your goal is to have the conversation not degrade to trivialities, to maybe make an empathic connection, maybe like a second date where somebody, or more than that, I mean, the first step in falling in love has to be that somebody feels that something big is at stake, is put away your phone. It's not enough to turn off your phone, put away your phone. Because a phone reminds us, whether or not we want it to remind us, that you have the capacity to be elsewhere. It's not even that you want to be elsewhere, but that you have the capacity to be elsewhere. So, I mean, I think that before I go on to other Turkle tips, because I'm filled, I must say that the research on this book, and the whole chapter is on romance. I'm surprisingly filled with tips and advice. The book was reviewed by Jonathan Franzen in the New York Times, and he described it as in part a kind of like totally high-class academic self-help book, and I couldn't figure out if that was like good or bad. I was like,
I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah.
On the one hand, I thought, kiss of death with my colleagues, like this could be like real, people will never again like invite me to lunch. And then I thought, well, actually, why shouldn't I, after investigating conversation and empathy, and why shouldn't I have written a book that actually tells some people things about how to be an advocate for conversation? So I decided to own it. So I'm okay with that. But that is the most important thing you can do. Is it really sacred spaces? Put away your phone, and then sacred spaces for conversation: the dinner, the kitchen, the dining room, the car. You're driving, and I was about to cross myself, even though I'm Jewish. So I mean, really, it's not the place. No devices. And if you tell if you're in a family, you tell your family, we need to talk to each other in this family. That's important to me in our family that we talk to each other. That's just how it's going to be. It's easier to tell this to somebody who's a younger child, but it's not, but you can, an older child or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you can also tell. You know, your boyfriend, if you're sitting next to your boyfriend, you're driving, and he takes out his phone, you say, it's important to me that we talk. And he will not, you know, if he doesn't like it, you just, you know, and then repeat. And then same thing if your girlfriend is using that as her time to catch up on her social media feed. You know, create a culture in the car where that's a time for talking. And I think that's very important. A third tip, and this is something that was so important in the interviews I did on romance, was the I call it the nothing gambit. That in romance, so often what you get back in texting is nothing. And people talk to me about, you know, they ask me, in history, could you ever do that before? You know, people just like dropping out like nothing, and like nothing, and actually, you know, people could not call you back. But that's a little different. That's like a statement. That's saying, I'm not calling you back. But it's not like in the middle of a conversation, I say this, you say this, I say this. and people actually experience that quite differently. As the date ends, there's just nothing after. And people sort of say, well, she didn't call me back, he didn't call me back. I think, you know, you could check, you know, some people, you know, check in, but they know they shouldn't, but they do. But, you know, but I mean, sometimes there's a check-in, but people kind of know that if sort of there's a great quieting, they know what happened. But it's almost as though the human nervous system isn't set up for conversation in which you say this, and I say this, and I say this, and it's like, and people find it quite upsetting, and I would say that it isn't a good way to end your relationships because of the, it actually causes distress and disorientation, beyond which, much more than you mean to cause. Because usually when people are doing the nothing response, all they're doing is they're deciding they really don't want to go out anymore. They're not making like a big, it's really like not calling back. But they're not treating it like they're in the middle of a conversation. They're treating it like they've had a date, and they don't want to call her again to go on another date or call him again to, you know. But it's psychologically, it's not like that.
So what should people do instead?
Well, the best thing to do is say, and this is the thing that no one wants to do. So, but again, is to have a conversation like, how, you know, I loved our date. It was so fun, and I just loved going to the Gotts and Gould Opera. It was like just amazing that you thought to invite me there. We share so little, you know. But you know, like in business, there's this ridiculous, you know, when you have a manuscript turned down, or have, I don't know how many of you have submitted film scripts, or, you know, there's this new line. We've decided to go in another direction. Have you heard this? Have you heard this line? We've decided to go in another direction. It's actually a very interesting line, because you know, it basically doesn't say your thing is bad. It says we've decided to go in another direction. You just say, you know, I really had a good time, but I think this just isn't right for me. And it's the functional equivalent of I've decided to go in another direction, which first time I heard it, I thought, oh, this is so pretentious. It must have been invented, you know, in California. But but actually, I've come to appreciate it. I've just come to appreciate it because I think it actually is very honest. I mean, it actually is kind. It's saying I'm going, and it's accurate in some sort of bizarre. It's like I'm going in another direction. So the kindest thing is to just actually complete the conversation. I'm going in another direction, which is what you say when you say that, you know, I think that this isn't right for me. I like it isn't right for me. Continuing on a romantic basis isn't right for me. So that's my love tip.
We'll check on your mic. On a related note, one of the most memorable stories in your book, and Aziz Ansari also put this in his book from your research, was the story of a young man who had a standing date with his grandparents to have dinner there. And when he wanted to cancel, he just wanted to send them a text or an email to say he couldn't come, and his mom said no.
So did Aziz quote me, or did I quote Aziz?
Aziz quoted you, right? Yeah.
Because Aziz and I worked together for, it could have been me.
I think it's your research.
Yeah.
So the mom said, you have to call your grandparents. And in calling the grandparents, he heard the disappointment in their voice. They had already started cooking. They'd set the table. And it was much harder to cancel. And I just thought that was so profound because of how, not only how people break up, but just general flakiness. So maybe you can talk a bit about that. But I thought that was just such a good tip, which is if you want to cancel plans, you should suffer the consequences of knowing how it affects the person.
Well, this was this has to also do with apologizing. That what was nice about this story was that it was sort of, it came upon very naturally in the family. So this was the mother's, it was the mother's parents, and they lived in it very close, would invite the son over to, I think he was 11, would invite him over to dinner. And it wasn't like Thanksgiving. You know, it wasn't like this was, or, you know, Rosh Hashanah. I mean, it wasn't like it was like just like come over to dinner. And as he got a little bit older, because it wasn't like a big holiday or something, he just got preoccupied with other things. And this thing settled in where because he didn't have to see them, he could just type, "I'm sorry, can't come," and hit send. And it really was not good for the family. And he was not feeling that he was causing distress. And the mother just decided that he had to at least call them, because when he called, he got to hear, your grandfather is making, you know, went to get sundaes with caramel sauce, and you got all the little, you know, the toppings. You can like do a sundae bar. There's a roast in the oven, and I'm making your favorite russet potatoes. I mean, he got to hear that actually they were going to have this dinner anyway. The grandfather liked the caramel sauce anyway. That it wasn't as though these people were incompetent and dependent and were going to fall apart, but he was going to be missed. And I think that that's what you don't get with "I'm sorry" and hit send, because the dance of what happens in an apology, I mean, take it to the higher level from romantic purposes. An apology is so important, and in my book I interview a woman who says, if my boyfriend apologizes by phone, I know 100% of the time that we are going to go back over this again. Because none of the work of an apology gets done. Because in an apology, I get to see, I'm apologizing to you, I get to see that you're upset. Then you get to see that I'm upset, and so you soften. You think, okay, she's real, you know, my grandmother used to say, don't apologize until you're contrite enough, or it's not going to work. Hold off. You know, think about it until you mean it, or else it's not going to work. An apology is not saying, I'm sorry. You have to have this whole dance go on. So then you see I'm really upset, and you soften, and you can't make eye contact. You have to let. No. Well, but you see how hard it is, because then you have to see that I really feel bad. It's hard because then you have to say I really feel bad, and then I see I have an opening. Now you can break eye contact. But yeah, you know, I have an opening. I have an opening that I can make something happen here. But unless I see that he, you know, the reason I was disoriented when he looked away is because I was actually trying to put myself into that state of mind, do I have an opening with this guy, where if I say I'm sorry, we can move to something else. And that's a whole complicated dance of people learning empathy. And if you don't do that, if you don't teach that, if you don't model that, if you don't learn all of that, you're missing a lot. In a romantic context, that's sort of back to basics. I mean, people are hurting each other all the time. I mean, there's no way to have a close relationship in which you're not having bumps. If you're not having bumps, you're not in a close relationship. I mean, it's almost, you put it that way, that it's not just like in a close relationship, there are obviously going to be bumps, but if there aren't bumps, you're not in a close relationship. So being able to have ways of saying, hey, you know, that wasn't, what I did wasn't cool, or, you know, hey, you know, I can understand how you felt there. That becomes part of the dance of the relationship, and if you're not doing that face to face, the balance of things isn't going to work. So I would not use texting for that purpose.
So that's a great transition into my next question, which is about eye contact. And I thought a lot about this as I was reading your book and now as I'm talking to you. And it just seems like eye contact is such a key part of exchanging information and of developing connection. And a few months ago, this article came out about 36 questions that lead to love. And it ends with people staring into each other's eyes for 4 minutes. So I think as we're going through Turkle's tips, we should think a little bit more about eye contact and really what it can do for intimacy.
Right. Well, eye contact, I mean, obviously eye contact is so important, and it was, that's why I want people to think so hard about screens in front of kids during moments when parents used to look at them. I have a very close colleague at MIT, Cynthia Brazil, who's developing robots that will read to children, and you know, I certainly get the gist. You know, more words, they will learn more words, socioeconomic groups that don't have words, but you know, really money for people who would be with those kids and read to them. I mean, the money, the $500,000 to have some people reading to those kids so they could make eye contact. I really worry about that they would actually develop something that people will put in their homes so they can do their email and the robot will read to the children. I really worry about this, or the idea of putting a baby bouncer and having an activity, you know, this slot for a robot, a slot for a pad, because eye contact is so crucial for developmentally, and it's so crucial in every relationship. And Skyping is so interesting because in order for, let's say I'm Skyping with you. No, actually him.
You're next.
In order, no, now you have to look at me. In order to, or I'll Skype with him. He wants to leave. In order to Skype, okay, you don't want to Skype. In order to Skype with him, in order to Skype with you, and for you to have the feeling that I'm looking at you, which is crucial to me, let's say, if I want you to bond with me, if I want you to feel the full blast of my attention, I have to look at the camera. So I can't be looking at anything happening in order to give you the experience of I'm looking at you. Now, how effed up is that? That I'm having no experience, or I'm only pretending to have an experience in order to give you a fake experience that I'm looking at you. So Skyping is really perfect for a couple, bringing into the romantic thing. You're in love, you're at a distance, you're in Chicago, she's in New York, you're cooking dinner, you set up to Skype, and as you're each cooking dinner, you're on Skype and you're chatting. And you have that sense of co-presence, and you're seeing each other's bodies as you both cook dinner. Fantastic, you know, in different states of undress or whatever you want, you know, whatever you want to do, but that's what it's optimized for. It is not the place to do this. And I've found different kinds of, studying different kinds of conference calling, where theoretically the camera situation is much more diffuse, so you should be able to have that feeling of looking in each other's eyes, is also very complicated because there comes a point where somebody feels they're in the main room and some other group feels they're not in the main room. And it usually happens, sometimes it's not clear where the main room is going to be. There's like a little bit of power struggle, like who's in the main room. And then something happens, some subtle shift, and some room becomes the main room and some room becomes not the main room. And then the people who are not in the main room, or who decide that they're not in the main room, start to text. And sometimes they start to text under the table, which is called phubbing. And my students tell me they know how to do this, that they all learned it in middle school when they wanted to text and not be seen by their teachers. So sometimes you see people doing it under the table, and then sometimes they're as though they aren't being seen. They'll just be, kind of doing it right there because they're not in the main room. So again, it has its place. It's obviously, I mean, you're a global company, you have to do it. But it's more like have respect. My message is, have respect for this thing that we know how to do humanly, and that definitely has its place, and do it when you can, and respect its power when you get a chance to do it.
Great.
And in romance, I tell a story of a couple who choose. This is this Adam and Tessa couple who actually like screen stuff, because particularly on the part of the guy, he feels that he can be a better self when he is online. More empathic, he can edit himself, he can get it right. I don't know, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I mean, all of us have had the feeling that, I sometimes get angry. You wouldn't believe that, but I sometimes can get very angry, and I had that bitch, that kind of like just angry, response, and then online, I'm just, oh, that's a kind of funny thing to have had happen, or, I'm a better person. I can just have that moment, and then I don't have to show it because I've had that delay time to edit. So we've all had that experience of feeling like the better me gets to be the one online. So the guy in the relationship, Adam, really likes that, feels that he's the better himself in the online presentation. And he's with a woman, Tessa, who basically is telling him that he's not empathic enough throughout the relationship. And she ultimately breaks up with him because she's telling him he's not empathic enough. I mean, even online, he hasn't, even with all these efforts, after 3 years, he hasn't reached her empathy standard. So, love tip, you are the self. You can edit online and be, it's good to be a more, to not, when you're with worker, when you're with people you care about, and with people who are working for you, and with your loved ones, nothing wrong about not, about being online and not having that immediate bitch response that I sometimes get, I'm overworked and overstressed and running around, and somebody does something, and which is going to cost me 3 hours, and are you kidding me? That kind of response. Nothing wrong with that, with going online and suppressing it. But really, let the people you love see who you are. Because, it is the unedited you that you have to accept, that they have to accept, that you have to work on, and that you have to feel loved for. And one of the it works in romance, but one of the more dangerously, parents, again in the book I talk about parents wanting their children to talk to robots. And, Hello Barbie or Siri, Hello Barbie is a fancy one, but all kinds of sociable robots are being invented to talk to children, to be their best friend, to be their buddy. And I talk about, from a psychological point of view, that danger lurks, because one of the messages the child, apart from the fact that I think pretend empathy is toxic, but I won't, that's such a different lecture that I won't even get into it here. In the book I go into this in great detail. But apart from that, you have to let a child feel that their truth is something that a parent can not only tolerate but love. And similarly in romance, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, you have to feel that the truth of who you are is what the person you love can love. So that is a more profound, I mean, since we began on sort of, you know, putting away your phone on a date, this moves us to the deepest level of, you know, tips for romances. You know, you have to feel that the person you're with actually loves you sort of with all the flaws and, you know, loves who you are. And there's something about this going online and editing yourself that can interfere with that.
Thank you. So I want to make sure people in the audience have time for questions, so I'm going to let you choose the next question from me. First choice is, people in the audience...
I get to choose the question?
I'm going to give you my next two questions. You can choose which one to answer.
Okay.
How does that feel? The first one is, we're at Google. A lot of people in this room probably make devices. If you could design any device that would help reclaim conversation, what would that be? Second choice is, if you could take over, I like to ask this to everyone, the google.com homepage for one day, so billions of people around the world would see something under the Google logo, what would you say?
They could click on my book.
Your publishers love that answer.
No, I want people to read my book. I do. I worked, I really worked to... This is a very different book from other books I've written. There's a lot of research. I mean, for 6 years I've done nothing but interview people, and I mean, it's not out of my head. But I had a mission. I wanted to, at the end of Alone Together, all these people were saying, I'd rather text than talk. And I thought, I'm a psychologist. If they really mean it, there are profound implications for how kids are growing up, how loving partners are relating, how business is being done, what families look like, you know, what solitude is looking like. I want to do a kind of ethnography of conversation in America. And if they mean it, I want to tell them that conversation is the talking cure for the failing connections of our digital life. And they meant it. There was this flight from conversation that I really hadn't, Alone Together really wasn't in a position to document that. It was about 100, it was about 1,000 other things. So I was kind of like, I was like on a mission, which was very different than Alone Together, where I'd done 15 years of NSF-founded research and I reported out. Or the same thing for The Second Self and Life on the Screen. Whereas here, I kind of wanted to know what was the state of conversation in America today, and if so, I felt very strongly about conversation based on my life as a psychologist and my training, and I don't see why technology can't be pro-conversation. In other words, I think this is absolutely a false dichotomy. I don't think technology has to take a stand against you don't need to be anti-technology to be pro-conversation. I'm pro-technology, pro-conversation. I mean, it's like, so the idea that you're taking a stand against technology to be pro-conversation, I think is just very bad for technology to be put in a position where it's taking a stand against conversation. That has to end, because that is not a sustainable. So this is just the last thing I would say before question, that really I think a future for a company like this is to get on the conversation bandwagon, because you don't want to be, you want to find a way to have conversation be part of your message, conversation be part of your product, to have technology be easily integrated into conversation. You don't want, just like you don't want computer-assisted learning to be an anti-conversation strategy. You don't want computer-assisted learning to be something that closes down conversation in schools. And if you find applications of computers in schools that are closing down conversations in classrooms, you want to change those applications. So I think that both the money and the kind of it's not just the money, but let's say the money. The money, I'll take it on any level. It's the money, the humanism, the forwardness, the future is for the corporate world to enhance conversation, enhance learning, enhance excitement. You don't want students who don't want to come talk to their professors because they think that they'll get the right, that this transactional model is not where you want to go. So, so I wouldn't mind everybody at Google reading my book. I think that would be that'd be good.
That's great. Okay, well, let's open it up. Let's be pro-conversation.
Pro-conversation.
And open it up to the audience. Okay, so just stand up and Scott will bring you the mic.
Okay. It's on. Is it on? Great. I thought I might start, if you don't mind. Do you have any thoughts about online dating and what happens when relationships are conceived online? And so all of the initial courtship occurs digitally, and then they finally meet, and I don't know what happens
Well,
next.
I've had some hysterical interviews of people who meet online, and both partners don't want to end the online part.
Yeah.
So, finally, one will say, well, how long can this go on? How long? Because the online part is so fulfilling. Mm-hmm. Because you're very busy. You're very either it's going to get fantastic or it's going to end. Everybody feels that way about dating. And online, you can be the person you want to be. They're being the person they want to be, and they're being the person who they think you want them to be. You're both being the person you think you're getting these. We've all become very good at picking up online signals of who we should be for other people. That's another skill set that's being developed that who knew we had, of being able to be. That's a new kind of empathy that's useful but sort of gets us into trouble, that online we know how to pick up this new kind of empathy that I don't even want to call empathy because you're playing to a fantasy thing. It's not the old kind of empathy. It's not doing the work of the old-fashioned empathy. So I interviewed so many people who could not get that real person into the room. I would say that you sort of want to get the real person into the room. The idea that the longer you keep it online, the better it's going to be, because I would say is not. I would say the longer it's kept online, the greater the chance that the person who shows up is going to be nothing like the rare and totally perfect creature that you've been talking with for 18 months.
Good Turkle tip.
Another Turkle tip, right.
Thank you very much for coming. I am really glad I came, and I'm looking forward to reading the book, in large part because I was a big fan of your books from the first two, actually. In 1995, I remember reading Second Self, and immediately feeling like this idea that people have identities online that give them freedom.
You mean Life on the Screen?
Life on the Screen, that's right. That was the one that even earlier than that.
Yeah.
I read it in probably 1994 or 95.
Right. Early adopter.
I completely, I wanted, that book made complete sense to me. I was very receptive to it. This book, I'm incredibly resistant to. So that's a great sign that I'm going to like it. It's I'm not, you see me. I'm not like a, this is what I think. That's what I say. This is what I think. Right, and this is my question. The two things that leap to my mind are largely historical when I think about my resistance to these. It's we've had some of this before. This doesn't at least seem to me to be that new. You have to kind of go back in time a bit. So a lot of what you've talked about...
Like the book?
The book and letters were the two things that struck me. So I'm really curious if you had a chance to look at kind of historically how the rise of the cheap paperback, for example, and the experience of letters challenged conversation in their historical periods.
Yes. And I'm only sorry that I didn't stop the book and say, and now let me talk about the book and letters. Because I just, I should have. But since I didn't, let me just talk about it here. So how many times have you been talking to somebody? If I went, you know what, we're in this conversation, but what I really want to do is read like 3 paragraphs of Madame Bovary now.
Never happened
to me. Hold on. I'll just get right back to you. And you go to Madame Bovary, you read your paragraphs, maybe just 1 paragraph.
Although I will say, kids do that.
Well,
kids will do that.
Right. You read a little Madame Bovary, and then you just say, "I'm back." Mm-hmm. So it's what Linda Stone called continual partial attention. Is that it's the lack of segregation. Because I think this book thing is very important. More so than the television example, because in this book I use television as a good example of how we can turn things around. Because I watch television as an example of people jumping around and making all kinds of fuss about a technology that could be used socially if you wanted it to be used socially. And why everybody assumed that you're going to be using this not socially is just like, it was part of the zeitgeist that people saw it as, destroying the family. But in my family, watching television was a contact sport. So we sat around watching television and arguing about what was happening on the television and fighting about what the people on the television were doing. It brought the family completely together. I watch television with I have a daughter. I mean, we watch television together. I watch television now when, she's graduated college now, so she has less time to watch television with me. But we watch Game of Thrones together, and it's like our closest, like when they killed off that whole family, I was like, no fucking way. I jumped up. It's a very social, watching Game of Thrones, that's another tip. I don't know if it's a tip for romance, but it's definitely, it's definitely a tip. It's definitely a tip for families who feel, they want to get closer. I'm very big on television games, card games. The point is not, it's a technology, but it's a technology of talking and socialization. The point is that. So television is a great example of how it's not the technology, it's the social context. So the trouble with this kind of, this is because you're telling somebody who literally you're in the middle of a conversation, you're a tape recorder, I'm putting you on pause, I'm going to the people in my phone, or I have a lot of data on how people use this thing called, this rule of 3, where they're sitting at dinner, you're 6, and 3 people have to have their heads up before, you go down to your phone. And it's basically just the same as in, which is how college students behave in dining halls. And the conversation stays light and people don't feel connected to each other. So that's the social norms around using the phone. People don't, at dinner, say, we're at dinner together and I'm going to just read a few paragraphs of my book. Now that's because we have social norms. It's not because they couldn't. It's because we've just evolved social norms that say, no, really, no, don't do that. And we can do that for our phones. So that's kind of my message. It's not, it's not the phone. It's that how did it come to pass in the past? As I was watching this thing unfolded, this rule of 3. I mean, how did it come to pass that it's really fine to go to dinner with 4 people and have 2 of them on their phone? And that's like what going out with my faculty colleagues is like. That is not unusual. And when you say, why is the phone here? And they'll say, an emergency. And then you ask them, I mean, I'm allowed to ask them because it's like I'm pretending like it's like research. What emergency? And the bar is very low. The bar is very low. The bar is very low. And that's what this book is arguing, that these are social rules. We've just invented them. They're extremely new. And we didn't invent them for the book. And let's uninvent them for the phone. And that this is work we know how to do. And then I love, my favorite example, I mean, just this is taking too long to answer a question, but my favorite example of turning something around is nutrition, actually. Because I was raised by a mother who adored me, and I use this example a lot, in the 50s and 60s, who fed me white bread and soup, that, the main two ingredients were sugar and salt, with a little bit of ketchup in the soup, I think, a little tomato something, and fruit that had like this sugary syrup thing, and vegetables in a tin, and she loved me. I mean, it wasn't money. And if I had fed that to my daughter, who just has graduated college, I would have been an abusive parent, or it would have been like a Mad Men retrospective thing I was doing. And I would have been like, I was doing like a retro fun evening. But it would have been, we know that we can't do that. And obviously there are still people who eat like that, and that's still, what's on a lot of shelves. But basically, I was looking for junk food a little bit of junk food in your cafeteria, because it's been real. I started this morning at 5 a.m. It's been a very long day. I couldn't find anything, like even I couldn't find the basics of the junk food option. So we know that this is not good, and we've changed our diets. That's not how we eat anymore. And that's not how I fed my daughter. And we've turned, it didn't happen immediately. There was a tremendous amount of opposition. It wasn't like the entire food industry said, you are so right. We just so completely fucked up when we tried to sell you that stuff. We are so sorry that we broke up the local food markets and put everything on this national food market that gave you no fresh food. Are bad. That isn't how it happened. It was like a social movement. It was a political movement. It was very hard. It's not done. I mean, it's not even done. But it's kind of getting done, and that's what's going to happen with phones. I believe that's going to happen with phones and education, and that's why I think that a company like this, just to say it again, just in case you didn't catch it, should be in the forefront of making that happen. You think of yourself, just be in the forefront of making that happen.
You talked a little bit about being pro-technology and pro-conversation, and I wanted to get your thoughts on, as a researcher, what's important for us when we're designing technology to incorporate in what we're doing, because sometimes we create technology that kind of wipes out part of the usual human interaction instead of like augmenting or
keep this in mind. I mean, when she said, what do I really wish on the Google page? I mean, I said, read the book. I mean, think about conversation as a design criteria. Think about conversation as a design criteria. I mean, I think Skype is fascinating. I mean, I really want to know why there can't be a technical fix to this. I want somebody to sit down and explain to me why there can't be, after how many years has this product been out? There's got to be a technical fix why, in order for my daughter to feel that I'm giving her eye contact, I have to be literally not looking at her for an hour.
Does anyone here work on the Hangouts team?
I think that's really I think that's really interesting. I mean, here's a really popular product, and and people use it to look at it, kind of like, And to me, it's very basic thing that it's supposed to accomplish. It's taken itself out of the game. So I want to consult to that. You should all consult to them and tell them how they can upgrade themselves, or somebody should, or there's got to be a technical fix where you look at something and it changes your game. I mean, there's got to be some physics, or there's got to be something. Got to get some hacker on that. No, seriously, because this is ridiculous. In order to make you feel that I'm giving you my full attention, because I'll tell you what's important. I'm trained as a psychoanalyst, and now psychoanalysts are doing psychoanalysis by Skype to China. And all these Chinese psychoanalysts are not, they're going to give them eye contact, for supervising sessions where you can't like be staring like this in a supervising session. They're going to be staring at a camera and never looking at the person they're supervising. This is crazy because you have to look at the person you're supervising. So you know, I mean, this is so crazy. This is like 15 articles worth of crazy to be giving someone clinical supervision without actually looking at them, because technically it's not possible to. Don't get me started.
We're missing out on empathy as we see less empathy, especially among kids. Does that mean that we're being replaced by the opposite of empathy? I'm thinking, what's the opposite of empathy? Selfishness. But then there's also self-doubt. And you mentioned when you're eating lunch with your colleagues and they pull out their phone. Why did you pull out your phone? It's an emergency. To me, that sounds like self-doubt. That maybe you're scared and you need to look at the phone because my relationship is in a place where I need to be responsive to this person or my relationship will collapse. And you have so many relationships where you're looking at your phone because you have so much self-doubt that if you don't respond, you're going to endanger your relationship. Or maybe it is just selfishness. Every Facebook like that you get, every new Tinder match just boosts your self-confidence.
This is so depressing. So this is like an interview with you describing why people are... Yes.
Well, I'm curious, what are you seeing? Like,
I'm seeing all of this. I'm seeing all of this. I'm seeing insecure. I'm seeing people insecure in their relationships. If you don't talk to people, you get insecure in your relationship. That's what I say. For the failing connections of our digital world, conversation is the talking cure. Because if your relationship is too much online, you will get insecure in that relationship. It's going to happen.
So you think that it's fear that's driving people towards
phones and away from? I think you get a lot of self-doubt if you don't, you know, I mean, just having been with you for like just a very short time, I feel confident in our connection. You just feel confident in the connection with someone when I feel very confident in our connection. I mean, we're built for this. This is what I mean. I mean, we have to, at some point, acknowledge what we are built for. We are built for eye contact, conversation, bodies together. We're built for this, and we're putting ourselves in, and it's better to design for what we're built for, and then we want to expand our horizons. You know, we want to expand the things we can do. Great with technology, but we should design around our vulnerability. But I think you're right. Where you're right is that I don't mean to say that technology is causing some of these problems. I think technology is enabling people to not have face-to-face conversations that they'd just as soon avoid.
I was curious about what metrics for measuring empathy you've encountered and what your analysis of that is. Well,
the metrics for measuring empathy are very simple. There are tests, and there are many, many tests, where basically you tell a story or you show a film, and then you basically say, what is this person, you know, can you put yourself in the point of view of this person? Can you put yourself in the point of view of that person? Now let's switch. What is this person feeling? What is this person feeling? And you know, it's very primitive. But it gives you a sense of whether or not people are able to do this perspectival switching and being able to put themselves in the perspective of other people.
Hi, thanks for coming. So I have a question that's not about phones, but it's about empathy, since you've done a lot of research into empathy. So what I'm curious about is, can you compare now versus in history? People's empathetic behavior in the second half of the 20th century and 21st century versus how people behaved 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago. Do you think we're more empathetic or less empathetic, or can you characterize it at all in that way?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, obviously, we're not doing these. You know, I don't want to say things where I couldn't possibly give a scientific answer because we didn't do these tests, right? So it would be, you know, we can only measure.
I'm more interested in your opinion.
Right. What I think is that the capacity for conversation and the fact of conversation generates empathic connection. And I believe that we had more conversation when we didn't have other distractions. And so I extrapolate from that we became practiced at what you get out of conversation, which is reading other people. That's really all I can say. But my concern, I mean, just say this again so that everybody hear me right. My concern really is not in proving that we're on a, I'm not kind of Ray Kurzweil, I'm not trying to prove us that we're on a slope up or a slope down or on a slope to being robots, or I'm just saying in our moment now, if you care about empathy now. So this is why I want to sort of like, just sort of keep it to what I'm an expert on. In our moment now, if you care about this value now, we're not on a good trajectory, and technology is an enabler. Right now, the way we're socially using the phones now, technology is enabling us on a path that's not helpful. And we can turn it around, because actually we are the empathy app for the kind of empathy I'm talking about. That really is all my research and my methodology can bring to you, to be most humble about what I can say. So that's my message, is if this kind of understanding, if you can, it matters deeply to me. I think that raising children, raising human beings without it is not going to be, we freak out about Asperger's. We freak out when people don't make eye contact. We freak out when they don't connect with us. And we're putting screens in front of babies at the very moments that were the key moments when we know that we're supposed to be making eye contact with them. So my favorite line in my book, I don't know if I said it, is that technology makes us forget what we know about life. So my message, just to close, is remember what you know about life, whether it's in dating, where you really don't want somebody looking at their phone. If somebody's looking at their phone during a date, I say, look, they should not be that they're not your person. Mm-hmm. They're not your person. And if you say to them, look, that's not the kind of thing, I'd rather you didn't, and they start giving you a hard time, how this is important to them because it might be an emergency, they're not your person. They're not your person. They're not your person. They should be like trying to make eye contact with you and just figuring out how they're going to do that. So remember what you know about life. If you're fighting with somebody to put away, about their phone and on a date, they're not your person. And remember what you know about life with your kids, that they need your eye contact, they need your connection, and start the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great talking to you.